Hello, everybody. Welcome to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I am the advertising manager for HGA, and I am your host today. We want to thank Fancy Fibers for being our sponsor today. If you've not checked out their website yet, be sure you do. That's Mary Berry, a good friend of ours, and we appreciate her sponsoring Textiles and Tea today. We will take questions at the end of the program, the last 15 minutes. Please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. It's really hard for me to see them in the chat, but I can see them in the Q&A. Love your chat, though. Keep those going. It's great to see those comments later on. So thank you so much. Today, we have Karen Hampton. Karen is a conceptually based fiber artist who addresses issues of colorism and kinship. She is recognized as a figurative storyteller, weaving together textures and colors of the ancient world with an imagined future. Excuse me. Material and imagery are part of her methodology to access her ancestral and personal heritage. Using her training as a weaver fiber artist with her training in anthropology, she synthesizes the weaver's role with that of a griot, the storyteller. Hampton's art practice easily flows between different fiber surfaces and materials. And we're going to see some amazing images and great stories today. Hey, Karen.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
We're excited to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Well, the important question is always first, which is, what is your favorite tea?
Well, it is Jinmai chai, which is a Japanese green tea that has rice, smoked rice in it.
Smoked rice. That's a new one. That's a new one. I have to check that one out. So would you share with us how you got started in fiber?
I started weaving. My very first weaving class was my last semester in high school. But I was prepped for it because my grandmother had been a seamstress and my mother sewed, and I was like a really anxious kid that wanted to get in the sewing room. So that was how I initially started, but then I trained with the master weaver, Ida Gray.
Oh, wow. For those who don't know, tell us a little bit who Ida Gray is. I want people to understand what it means that you were with Ida Gray.
Ida was located in Mill Valley, California. Ida was a weaver. Her lineage went back to the Bauhaus and to Black Mountain and the Pond Farm, which was in Sonoma County. She was when I studied with her, it was the time when she was 63 and I was 21. And she was from kind of the old Bay Area school of weaving. Very much influenced by nature. She wrote the book Nature's Colors, and she also wrote a book on warping the loom from back to front. And the time when I worked with her, she was writing a book that was shaped on the loom garments.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, this first piece we're going to look at is called Invisible Child. And this is a basic hand woven, and then you put image transfers on this. It's part of the work. And I was curious, when you started using transfers on your work, how did that change your approach to weaving, or did it?
Oh, it took me a long time before I could put transfers on my work. I looked at it and thought about it. I thought it was like blasphemy to everything I had learned. And it just took a long, long time to do it. Really, it was when I wanted to really invoke voice, and really was starting kind of my thing of putting the way that my mind was thinking, and I was grappling with life and being Black, and having very few Black role models in the weaving world. And so I was really struggling with that. And so this piece, Invisible Child, was really about whether you were light or you were dark, you were still invisible.
Now, was this one of the first pieces that you started doing transfers?
This was the second piece I did a transfer.
Did you get a lot of grief from people about doing that?
No, I got none.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good.
It was like what I was putting into it.
Yes. We're our worst enemies sometimes, aren't we?
Yeah, well, it was something I was jumping off and doing something that was, if I did it wrong, it could ruin a beautiful weaving. And that was really the biggest issue with me.
Well, not to get too much into the technical, but I was curious, when you're going to do the transfer, do you find that you do a closer set or a tighter beat, or?
No, it's okay. What I'm doing in that case is that they're painted warp double weaves. So,
okay.
So I'm painting 2 different warps and then creating my weave structure. And in these pieces, I was using a pretty coarse cotton, and I just love the way that it took up the color.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discharged it. And then the final thing was the transfers.
Now the discharge are the squares that have like the circle and the V's and that kind of thing, right?
Well, every place where you're not seeing the dark brown.
Oh, okay.
And not the red or the yellow, but that's the back side of it. But really I liked the block effect, and I liked being able to do it as a painted warp and have it transition.
Well, that takes us right into my next question, which was your work and we're going to see more of this today as we look at more of your work, but you dye in blocks like you were talking about. You've woven in blocks, you've sewn blocks together. So do the blocks have some meaning for you? Is it more about structure than design? Am I making more of this? I think you're finding what you're finding in it, but I was really, when I first began doing it, I was really thinking about ancestral legacy. And so thinking about kente cloth, like if you look at the piece on the left, Faces of the Gods, that piece is all strip woven. And so it has all of the painting and everything. And when I'm doing those blocks, I don't pre-plan. I sit at the loom and I make decisions as I move along. So I never see what the entire yardage looks like until it comes off the loom, when I decide how it would be sewn together. And then in this case, discharge. This is a very heavily discharged piece. Would you talk some about the one on the right? This is so beautiful.
Sure. Yeah, this is George Washington Carver. Many people think that it's Gandhi, but they were close friends. This was a piece that I wanted to do. I was kind of doing a riff on Andy Warhol when I created this piece, but it was a piece that I really was making because I was really looking at George Washington Carver's life. He had always been someone that had been symbolically brought up culturally from my mother. But what I was interested in his work in sustainable agriculture. And I was interested in the fact that he was a trained weaver and he was a knitter. And so the image that I used in this was an image of him in his lab, sitting and knitting. And, you know, that he was a kindred spirit. And there's a poem that runs in the back. And well, it's a piece of a poem, and it's "A weed is a flower in the wrong place." And I'm not sure if it was a direct quote of his or it was from a children's book by the author Aliki. And really, it just was this true, you know, a true pioneer in his own way.
Now, what are the sizes? Do you recall the sizes of these two
Yes.
pieces?
I know that George Washington Carver is something like 40 by 50.
Wow.
And I cannot remember what the size is, but it's something similar. That's a kind of a standard large size that I was making at the time, for Faces of the Gods.
Well, this next image is "We Will Not Forget." And this was from a residency that you did at Michigan State University. And the original theme, from what I understand, was that you were going to talk about, or you were going to focus on Flint, the city of Flint, and the horrible water disaster they have going on there. And then while you were at the university, the really big hurricane hit Puerto Rico. So as your theme changed, did your plans for the weaving change?
No, not my plans for the weaving. I think that it had been one that I was working on, and I thought that it was something I really wanted to explore. I really wanted and needed to include Puerto Rico because it was so devastating what they were going through. And both the issue in Flint and the issue in Puerto Rico were both over water. And really, my feeling was that water is the human right. And so it was really about being seen that I wanted to have a piece for Puerto Rico about being seen.
Now, was this a double weave also?
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous piece.
Oh, thank you.
One of the things I've always heard, well, my guild talks about it. I mean, a lot of guilds talk about it, but and you've talked about it in some of your discussions and interviews, is that there are a few African-American weavers, and the expectation is if you are an African-American fiber artist, it is assumed you're doing quilts. So what do you think of that? What is the cause behind that? What is what keeps African-Americans out of weaving?
Well, I'm just going to talk about it from my perspective, and
there you go.
You know, that really I started weaving in the 70s, in the mid 70s. And really, by the time the 90s came around, I knew less than 5 Black weavers. And I was really puzzled. How did I end up being a weaver? And, you know, and there were very few others. And so as I was really pondering this, I kept thinking about there must be a historical link. It's the only thing. It just felt like there was something that was missing. And so I went to graduate school in 98. And when I was in graduate school, I went to UC Davis from 98 to 2000. And my time in graduate school was spent doing research on African American women in textile production from 1750 to 1830. And then I made artwork that was in response to what I found. And I also did field work where I traveled through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, looking to find traces because I didn't find anything in books at the time. It just was like, there was a giant void. And so what I did was I started looking at it. I started using that anthropological stuff that I had. I find anthropology to be great tools for discovery. And because it's both cultural and solid research based. And so when I travel, I was looking at three things. I was looking at indigo as the second oldest second largest field crop in the country. I was looking at plantation weaving, and I was looking at indigo and cotton becoming king. And so it meant I had to understand history.
Well, it was interesting. I read, and you talked about that you had a fellowship, which I think this is brilliant, that you used time to travel to places that had historical meaning for you, and that part of the inspiration from these works were your experience and the emotions that these places brought up for you or evoked for you. Can you talk about those places and what they reflected for you?
Okay, well, let me just begin that I'm someone that gets bored easily. So I try to find things that are going to be interesting to me. And it so happened after I'd done my research in graduate school, my father came back to me 6 months later, and he said, a cousin that I haven't heard from in 40 years contacted me, and he has all of this family history stuff that and it was the same period of time that I was doing my research, and it was in Florida. And so I quickly put on that hat that anthropology had, and I learned as much as I could about Northern Florida. And so the piece on the left is my ancestor 8 generations ago, and his name was George John Frederick Clark. And in short, he was British by birth. And George and his life partner, Flora, who had been enslaved when they met. And their lives, they both were born in the 1770s. George, I'm just giving you a short version of it all. George became Surveyor General of Florida, and he manumitted Flora. And Flora by 1808 had 500 acres in her name. And when George died in 1836, he left his brown children, he left them 33,000 acres. And so this is a history that is known in Florida, but it is not known. It's not, because it was under the Spanish, and so Spanish land grants. And the piece on the left is the Patriots' War. And George, during his time when he was Surveyor or after Surveyor General, he became like the governor of Fernandina, Florida. He plotted the town of Fernandina. It was the last town that was plotted during Spain's conquering years. And it was prospering. This is another piece of history that's not told, where there's a Black and white community that is prospering. And then I was to find that the gunboats came from South Carolina and basically invaded the land. George was the person that went out to them and took down the Spanish flag so that no one would be harmed. And people went into hiding. This is all in between 1812 and 1814.
So much history. I've never heard any of this. Now, I'm not necessarily a history buff, but it's amazing how much history you never know about.
That's what I find. I find that everyone has stories. And that's the brilliance of it, is that, you know, and when I started putting the stories on textiles, because textiles is how, you know, is my medium, I really just felt like if Picasso could have beautiful women as his muse, I could have history as mine.
I like that. Well, you were described as an indigo dyer. And I kept seeing that when I read an article about you or see your interview, indigo dyer. Part of me was like, I'm sure she dyes other things, but I do want to talk about you and indigo. And these pieces are amazing. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show this slide is just so people will understand the size of your work, how incredibly large these are to make and to dye. So can you talk some about your relationship with indigo, and do you use other dyes?
Oh, I definitely use other dyes. I mean, you know, my first indigo dye bath was back in like in the 70s with Ida. And I was fascinated with it, but it was not my primary dye. And for my first 10 years of dyeing, all I did was do natural dyeing. So you know, before I started getting into this historical work, really, I mean, I'm a very strong colorist, and it was really the fact that I was dealing in these very heavy subjects. And it began when I was in graduate school, where I wanted this work that I was making to really only be using things, use tannins as dyes or indigo. And it just took me through a long, long phase of working in indigo. It's like I periodically go back and start like having big explosions of color, but it's like it really, for these two pieces were, I was using the technique of burnout in this work. And so I'm creating a cloth that's a cellulose, non-cellulose cloth. And then I'm using, you know, and then I'm burning it out so that because I wanted to create work that still had structural integrity. How far could I push it to still have structural integrity and have holes in it? And so that was my whole exploration. The piece on the right was one of the pieces that I created after I visited the Hampton plantation in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And after talking to the docent there and the ranger, it was one of the first plantations where they started using not infrared photography, but they started using photography that was heat sensitive, where they could see and they could decide where they would do digs, especially to find where slave quarters had been on a landscape that didn't show it anymore. And the Hampton plantation was owned by Eliza Lucas Pinckney, who's known as the mother of American indigo, in quotes, her daughter. And so, when I first went there, I was really timid in going there. I was fascinated to find, indigo growing. And I mean, we're talking about 1999. And trust me, there were very, very, very few Black people that would go to a plantation at that point. I just say that I was naive and I was from California, so I didn't know enough to be fearful.
What an experience it must be. I mean, I can't imagine the reactions that you had, the feelings that you had of going to someplace like that.
Well, I've had lots of reactions to it. And one of the things that I say about it is that, when you can look at negative history in the face, and history that is very repressive to you, when you can look at it in the face, then you get power.
Well, the next question kind of goes along with that in a way. It's like indigo and cotton have succeeded in the US because of the use of slave labor. Some fiber artists do not want to have anything to do with cotton or indigo. How have you resolved this for yourself? You've kind of just mentioned about that also.
Yeah, it's really by just looking at it, really just taking away its power. Like the image that I used in these transfers here was from postcards. It was from a postcard that I found after I had gone and done my research in graduate school, and some friends took me to I think it was like a coin shop or something in Davis, like old coins or something. And they had postcards. And I just said to the guy, I said, do you have any images with brown people on them? And his response was, yes, but I don't think you'd like them. And I said, oh, please bring them out. And so that began my first collecting of these things to use and to try to change the energy within them. Rather than just find it as a weight and overwhelming, it's to change that, to make it something that we can acknowledge our history. Because if we don't acknowledge our history, we'll never be able to move on from it. We'll just keep having to go back and do it over and over again.
Can you say a little bit about this piece, The Spirit's Cry?
Well, it's really about the children, because there were young children that were out in the fields. And, and through their entire lives, they were out in the fields. And racism has such a heavy weight. It has a heavy weight on everyone, whether they acknowledge it or not. But to be the subject of it is just extremely repressive. And what I found in being able, to really work with Spirit's Cry, that this was really, giving them voice.
Family is really important to you too. And as I look at your work, I see that your family appears in many of your pieces. Now, this next work is about your grandmother. And I was so struck by this because I saw you had said in an interview, or you wrote in an article, that this piece had to be about stitching because that's what your grandmother did. So would you talk some more about this piece, but also what was the influence that your ancestors had on you and your work?
Okay, so my grandmother was a trickster. That's what I've decided as I've grown up. She was very quiet, and she moved in with us after my grandfather died when I was a year old. And so she was always close at hand. And she made the most beautiful clothing. And I was always struck by her stitches were so perfect. And so I never thought I would ever be doing any stitching because, it was not my patience. It was not, any of that. But when I was doing pieces to honor different people, like I had done the George Washington carver and I had done some others. And then I said, I really want to do a piece, an honoring piece for her. And I said, it has to be a dress form. And I'd been collecting, this is a really strange one. I started collecting old linens when I was in high school. And I treated them kind of like a dowry. I'd take them out like once a year and look at them and just love them, and then fold them up and put them away, and kept moving and doing everything I did, and kept this, and occasionally would grow a little. And so I knew exactly what I was going to do when I was going to make something for her.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. What's the cloth, did you say?
It's a table runner, a very thin cotton table runner.
It's cotton? Wow.
Yeah.
That's an amazing piece. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
That was an amazing piece.
It's kind of a funny one, though. It's kind, if you can go back to that slide for a minute. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay. I did on it right at the bust and right at the hips. I folded it up like you would do a pattern, to adjust the size.
Uh-huh.
So there's you can see the color changes just a little in those places, because that was to also just mark how, how she would be thinking about doing any alterations.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That makes the piece even better. Now, these next works that we're going to look at are from your portrait series, and you have a great story with this. So would you talk about the story behind these ideas?
Okay, so when I started these portraits, I grew up, my grandaunt, my grandmother's sister, was the keeper of photographs for a family. Mm-hmm. And as a child, I was like the kid that once a month I would have to go through every picture that she had and ask her and try to commit it to memory as to what these photographs were.
Huh.
And she was very, very important to my life. And she died right at the time when I started weaving. And we lost all of her photos.
Oh.
And it was a tremendous loss. So years later, when my mother died, we found that my mother had kept my grandmother's billfold. And in that, she had a photograph, and this photograph was really, really damaged. And that's the one on the left. And this was my grandmother's brother, who was, they were born in Jamaica and moved to Panama during the teens. And his father sent him to Kodak in New York to go study photography. And so he's a trained photographer. And I had no idea when I first looked at this that there was a movie camera or anything. But it took me like 6 months to work in Photoshop to repair it, because it's kind of like my mother and her sisters had all like been fighting over the photograph, and it had peeled away in so many places and stuff. But it turned out that it was that. And this was in his studio in New York. And on the right is my paternal grandfather. And I had never seen a photograph of him. And this was another one when his younger sister needed to be moved. This photo was found in her house of my grandfather, and he's 4 years old in this photograph. And and I'm so fascinated by the clothing, by just kind of the look on his face. Obviously they're at a portrait studio, everything. And so for me, this was the one on the left. I did a number of them that were his photographs, and it was really about wanting to bring his photos to life. And the one with my grandfather and some of the others are just these real feelings where, oh my God, my family has some really interesting things, and I think they're really cool. And it was at a time I was doing these during a time when I did not have any water in my studio. And so I couldn't do any dyeing. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I sought out to learn how to do digital prints. And I started doing layered digital prints with different information, and then hand stitching them together during this period.
Now, I understand that the idea of this is kind of reflective of an exhibit that you had seen of a bunch of portraits, right?
No, actually,
No?
I'm talking, when those were my abolitionist portraits.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I went on from this and I did 12 abolitionists, because it was a fluke. I ended up having a solo show, my first museum show in upstate New York, in central New York, at the Wellen Museum. And I knew nothing. My work is about sense of place. And so I was like going, well, I don't know anything about that area. And I said to the curator on first meeting, I said, I only know 2 things about this area. I know that Frederick Douglass lived in Rochester, and I know that Harriet Tubman lived in Auburn. Now, I don't know why they lived up there, and they were both from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is where my father's mother was from. Mm-hmm. And that entire lineage. And so it began. And so I asked my curator, had she seen this one photograph of Frederick Douglass? And she just looked at me, and we were on Zoom, or maybe it was one of the predecessors to Zoom. And she said to me, that photo, that's the Casnovia Convention, and it's held by the photos held by the Historical Society in the next town. And so it just kind of launched me into really looking under nooks and crannies for the abolitionist history of central New York. And learning, really, because I do these things so I don't get bored, so I learn more things.
You're the great searcher.
Yeah. Yeah, I love doing research.
Well, I'm curious about your work, and your work is just, it's so varied and multi-layered. But the other thing is, it just seems in labor intensive. So how much time do you spend in your studio? And do you have like a regimen of every day at this time, I'm in my studio until this time, or how does that work for you?
Well, the only time when I've been really good with a regiment was like if I felt like I was having a block, then I create a regiment to go, that I have to go do it no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
until I can get past it. Otherwise, it really depends, that if I'm, these days, if I'm planning on a show or something, then I'm going to be in there all the time. If I'm, like right now, I just moved a year ago, so it's like I'm still like I normally give myself a year. I don't put any pressure on myself after a move. But this year I've had a couple shows, so I've had to be in here working, and another project that I'm working on. So I have to be disciplined and really do it a whole lot, because like I'm always torn between being outside and being inside. I don't know if other people have that issue, but when the weather's nice, I want to be out gardening.
Mm-hmm. So as you talk about these shows and stuff, that's my next question is, what's next for you?
Well, I don't know what's coming next in the show world. My show just came down in April. So probably there'll be something coming up, I don't know, in the next year or something. So I probably do need to be doing a lot of work. I'm working on a commissioned piece, which is like a photo collage, a photo textile collage that will be converted into another medium and be in public as a public art piece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm very involved with that. And that's a project that takes a number of years.
Oh, wow. So when do
Yeah.
you think that would be done? So we can watch for it.
It will be on display in 2027.
Wow, that is a long time to be working on something. Wow. Well, good luck. I can't
So,
wait to see it.
so it's kind of cool. It's and I'm thinking about working on doing like since I have a big studio, um, I'm thinking about, I'm kind of like a fig tree in a way. If a fig tree has room for the roots, then it will grow really big. And if it, is confined in a pot, then it's only going to be so big. So that's kind of the way that I approach things. But I'm kind of, since I have really big walls right now, I'm really thinking about doing some big, larger work.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we have questions. Do you want to take some questions?
Sure.
All right. Do you publish your work? This is from Susan Keller. I'm an African-American tapestry weaver and have not met each other. Well, you're going to have to put that on your list. You and Susan Keller need to find each other.
Okay.
So do you has your work been published? Like in
yes, if I've written, I think, 3 pieces that have been published by the Textiles Society of America. And so everything's archived through Lincoln, Nebraska. And so, my research and stuff like that is published there.
Okay. Kim McManus said, do you think education can increase the number of African-American weavers?
Yes. I think that's I think that well, back to that original question, one of the things that I think really has been at the forefront of keeping the numbers so small is really the historical lineage. And it really goes back. That's why I went back to slavery, to try to understand it. But when you consider, weaving requires a loom, which is equipment. It requires space to be able to set up a loom properly. These are all things that really have not been, the availability has not been there the way that for other people. And the historical thing of what is, because weaving really came in this country from the plantations, from Southern plantations. So there are all these historical facts that are involved there, but I absolutely think that it should. I think the more that weaving is taken into community centers, I think that Richmond, California is an example of a place that has a really great weaving studio that is relatively low cost for community to go and work. I think that any opportunity like that, I think anything that you're able to get access to without, weaving has been, in so many ways, has been tied up in universities. And really, number one, the numbers of students of color that are able to go and study art is so low compared to the dominant population that, so I think the more that it's involved in the community, the more opportunities there are. And I also think that really, even on the university level, that it takes a long time to really have it cycle in your brain. How do you set up a loom? This is a simple machine, but it is something that you have to train your whole body to feel it, to know how to do it. And so I think that, the more that it's at the community level, the better.
That's an interesting point of view. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I mean, that's how I learned, was at the university level. So this is Kim McManus again. She says, have you ever thought of writing a history book and using your media pieces to illustrate? She said, I could listen to you all day long.
Oh, that's so nice. I actually did. I made a little blurb book, because I wanted to explain to people my research in Florida. And so, it's a very small little thing, but it's available through Blurb, and and so it just has, the images and kind of a walking story.
Nolan Wright wants to know, where will your public piece be cited for the completion in 27? Can you say?
Yeah, it's going to be cited in Los Angeles.
Oh, good.
And it's going to be in a metro station in the Westwood UCLA metro station.
Oh, what a great place. So many people will see it. Oh, that'll be amazing. This is from Anne-Marie Mullen. How can we encourage people of color to get involved in weaving? I'd like to start an arts in the class at the elementary school level where I can bring looms to the children. William Sport Handwoven.
Number one, I was a kids art teacher for many, many, many years and started teaching weaving. And, so I am a big fan of starting kids with cardboard looms, even as soon as their dexterity is good enough, which is usually around 6 or 7. And, and just encouraging them from that. I think that IKEA sells a little frame loom that's inexpensive that I think is a really good one. I just think that anything that gets you, because I was seduced by weaving. That was what happened to me, was that I had a teacher that gave me an assignment, and I didn't know weaving yarn from knitting yarn. So we had knitting yarn around my house. And so I just made my warp and my weft, and I was doing tapestry because I learned some basic tapestry techniques. And I just found that this thing was hypnotic for me. It took me to a place that was really, really healing. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts that textiles has.
I would encourage her also to go check out Connie Lippert. Go to her website. Connie has a great pattern to make like a phone case, whatever. It's very, very simple. She used it for years with kids. And I've done it with kids. So I love that pattern. So if you're still listening, Connie Lippert, she's a great diagonal weaver. You'll love her work, but she has a great pattern for making an easy creative weave for kids. This is from Barbara Shapiro. Hi, Barbara. Not a question, but it was awesome to hear some things about you that I did not know. Many stories that resonated with me in the past. Thank you, my friend. So you got a fan club out here, Karen. Woohoo! This is from Gloria Bismeyer. I don't know if you understand what this means. I don't, but I'm assuming you will. We were on the Mesa Prieta walk. Are you going to weave petroglyphs?
I woke up this morning thinking about that. Well, I live very close to Mesa Prieta, and it is one of the largest, and I have this love for petroglyphs. I have, this connecting with ancestors is really a big thing for me. And when I think about petroglyphs, I think about the ancients. And and so when I'm thinking about things 10, 12,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, I'm just really thinking about human evolution, and it's so deep. And I was just on that walk, and there were some magical things. And so I'm sure that they will find their way one way or the other, but literally this was just going through my mind between yesterday and today.
You and Barbara are on the same wavelength. Now, this is from Loretta Oliver. I'm also an African-American weaver since the 70s, wondering if you've done any research on possible weavers at Hampton University in Virginia or Spelman here in Georgia about the 1800s. Supposedly, I have a grandmother that may have gone to one of those two. The history's been passed down verbally.
Well, during my research when I was in graduate school, I went to Hampton. And one of the things that I was fascinated with, Hampton really stood out because it was one of the okay, so what I was able to find, Hampton did have weaving.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I was able to find out about was that there had been a weaving mill run by abolitionists in Massachusetts. So I just moved from Massachusetts, and that popped up again for me, because I was to find that Sojourner Truth was part of this weaving collective.
Really?
Yes, in Northampton. And they were silk weavers.
Oh.
And that there's this whole history while that's in Northampton, right next door is Florence, Mass. And like, that's where her house is, and that's where there's all this great study. So while I can't speak to Spelman, I think that there is so much to be discovered. And I hope more than anything else that I encourage people to, go and travel and really seek out new learning opportunities and let that be part of your storytelling.
And ask.
Mm-hmm.
When you visit these places, ask.
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting to see what kind of reaction they get and that kind of thing. And then there's someone else, Janice is saying the same thing. You need to write a book. So you've got this whole group of people that's saying you need to write a book. No pressure, but you need to write a book. Okay, Mary Holm wants to know about the fabric on the wall behind you.
Oh,
Over the other shoulder.
Oh, can you see it? I didn't know you could see it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One of the things that I did start in 2014, I did an artist residency in Northern Nevada.
Wow.
And I was there for 2 months. And in that time, like, this is how I got started with petroglyphs, was that a friend took me and showed me some petroglyphs, and I was fascinated. Then I heard that there was this other place, and I met these women that took me, and we had to drive 3 hours out in BLM land. Like, I mean, where, there are horse skeletons, and there's just like, you're like kind of freaking out that you might never make it back, and you'll become one of the things. But we eventually found one of the largest petroglyph sites, which is Lago Marcino. And because they don't have any directions to get there, so it's only by people having memory, because they don't want things defaced.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it comes down to. But the experience of going there, I brought it back with me, and then later I ended up making these pieces which are based on kind of that whole realm of the ancients, and really that based on this whole thought of that all the answers are right here.
Yeah, that's true. Well, unfortunately, we still have lots of questions, but we've run out of time. Karen, thank you so much for being on here today. Somebody else said they could listen to you forever. I could too. I would love to just sit down and just hear more and more about, everything you've learned and your research. And I'm eagerly awaiting your book, and we'll have you back on and we'll talk about your book. No pressure, but we want that book.
Thank you so much.
If you want to know more about Karen and her work, go to her website, katiehampton.com. I'm assuming, Karen, you'd be okay if the people who didn't get their questions answered, they would contact you. Can they contact you through the website?
Absolutely.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. We want to thank our sponsor today. It was Mary Berry's fancy fibers. Go check out our website. And Mary, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Textiles and Tea. We really do appreciate it. If you or your friends or your guild or your business would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, please go to the website and look under Textiles and Tea, and you can see sponsorship there, and you can do it that way. We appreciate everyone who's given money toward this program that we keep it going. Seems like every week we have yet another great speaker, just like Karen today. Thank you so much. We have the hand woven towel exchange coming up. If you still got time, you can still enter it, and you can do that online also at wespendie.org. It's a great program. It's so nice to get these towels from someone else, and when you look at them, you think about these wonderful people and the things that they've made. So check it out. All the rules and guidelines are on the website, and you can learn about the deadline there also. Convergence is coming up. We're working hard on it. We're working on the registration book now. Can you believe it? So we're looking for vendors, and we're looking for sponsors. So if you are interested in being a vendor, and we have several signed up already, be checking our web page from time to time, and you can see who's already signed up. If you're interested in signing up, super cheap right now. If you wait longer, the price is going to go up as always, but check that out and see if you're interested in being a vendor. We'd love to have you there. We're also doing sponsorships for everything from the tote bags to the hospitality room and everything in between. So if you're a business, a guild, an individual, and you would like to help sponsor Convergence, go to the website or give me a call. I'll be glad to help you with that. I want to thank folks for donating to the Fiber Trust and your membership. Donations to the Fiber Trust help our programming, whether it's Careers in Textiles, Spinning and Weaving Week, Textiles and Tea. Those donations help us keep these programs going, and we appreciate everyone who's donated. Thank you so much. If you missed an episode, you want to watch it again, or you want to watch it with a friend, you can watch it on the HGA Facebook page, or you can watch it on the HGA YouTube. And I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube, because if you do, when we upload something, you'll get a notice that a new episode's been uploaded. Next week, we have Nolan Wright. If you remember, he asked a question today. He's watching, keeping track of us. And next week, I won't be here, but I have Chris Acton, who was also a Textiles and Tea guest back in January. She's going to come in and be a host for me. And I appreciate you doing that, Chris. Nolan, sorry, I'm going to miss you. Check out his work. He makes incredible baskets. You're going to enjoy this. So y'all have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll see you in 2 weeks, but everybody else will see you next week. Happy tea.